Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for attending this webinar. It is my honor to introduce Greg Marcus. Not only is Greg the author of Busting Your Corporate Idol, practices self-help for the chronically overworked. In addition, he has another book called The Spiritual Practice of Good Actions. He is a Mussar practitioner, which is the Jewish mindfulness practice for living a balanced life. And in addition, he also holds a PhD from MIT in biology. So thank you so much, Greg, for hosting this webinar. We're really looking forward to hearing how to use priorities in both your career and personal life. So thank you so much. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. Okay, so I thought as a little bit of a warm-up activity, I want to let you know I am a recovering workaholic. At one point in my life, I used to work 90 hours a week. I'm just curious, for people who are on the webinar today, I'd love to hear from you in the chat box. How many hours a week are you working? Uh-oh, I'm not seeing, wait, here we go. Okay, we got 50, we got 80, we got 60 from Carol, 55 on my job, and more on my side gig. Okay, so we have some other people putting in some pretty serious hours as well. Okay, so my second question I want to ask, has anyone had their work interfere with their personal life in the last 3 months? As I'm going to share with you, when I was working 90 hours a week, it took a big toll on my family. I had a wife and a couple of small kids at the time. Still have a wife, a couple of larger kids now. I had, I started getting health issues. It took a bit of a toll. And I see from some of you, it has interfered as well. So I'm going to ask a third question, and I don't expect anybody to answer this. I'm going to answer it myself. And have you ever felt completely worthless because of what was going on at your job? And I don't expect you to answer it, but I certainly was in that position. And it didn't start that way. I thought I had the dream job. I was marketing an amazing product, and then I was put in charge of product development for the next product. We had all kinds of issues. I had everybody work through weekends, through holidays for an entire year. We got to our launch date. We shipped it to customers, and it flopped. It flopped in every single customer's hands, and everyone blamed me. Well, I went through quite a time. I was publicly humiliated by the president of the company. I went to our biggest trade show of the year and watched our best customer present absolutely terrible data to a room full of people. And I got to spend the next 3 hours tap dancing and explaining that everything was going to be fixed and was going to be okay. Well, that night I was walking to a bar with some of my friends to blow off some steam when my cell phone rang. It was my mother. Greg, Grandma died today. I don't know what I said or what I was thinking, but the next thing I remember, my mother said, "You're not thinking of skipping the funeral, are you?" Well, I was thinking of skipping the funeral. I was so into my work. And they actually held the funeral for a day so I could finish my work at the trade show. Well, 2 weeks later, I was still really down, and now it was Yom Kippur, which is the day when Jews don't eat or drink anything. Some people go to services. We think about our life. And so I was sitting in services. It was about 3 in the afternoon. And I looked down at the translation, and it said, "Don't turn to idols or molten things." And my initial reaction was really dismissive. I'm like, geez, Louise, my life has fallen apart here, and now they're talking about this statues thing. But then this phrase popped into my head: you need to do what's best for the company. And at that point, my stomach clenched and my palms got sweaty, because I realized that's exactly what I've been doing. That's the rationalization phrase. That's the "we need to cancel everybody's vacation" phrase. And I realized that I had turned my employer into a false idol. And I decided that day that I was tired of doing what's best for the company. I was going to do what's best for myself and what was best for my family. And within a year, I'd cut my hours by a third without changing jobs. A year later, I cut my hours by a third again. And the secret and the way I did it and the thing that changed the course of my life was changing my priorities. I decided I had to start putting people first. And throughout the course of this webinar, I'm going to tell you what I learned along the way, the methods that I used in order to regain control of my life. And what was amazing is when I cut my hours by a third, nobody at work noticed. Not a single person ever said anything. And in fact, my career got better and resurrected itself because in hindsight, I realized, well, I wasn't the tired, stressed out wreck all the time. And my family life just really blossomed. My health recovered, and things got much better. So in preparation for writing my book, when I decided to write a book about my experiences, I interviewed about 36 people. And this is the profile of an overworked life that came up. And for those of you who are putting the long hours, you've probably experienced some of these things at some point yourself. It's not even just about being tired. Life becomes unsatisfactory. We don't eat well. Our sex life suffers. We have health issues. We miss events. And I see someone in the comments mention that they missed an event because of something for work. And I'm sure we've all experienced this at one point or another. So as I talked to people, there were certain myths about work that kept coming up. So I want to spend just a couple minutes busting some of these most common myths people have that lead them to work too many hours. So myth number one is that everyone is overworked. So I decided to do a LinkedIn poll a couple of years ago, and what I found was this wasn't true. It's only about 30% of people are working more than 60 hours a week, and about a third work less than 50, and a third were in the middle. But this spanned all kinds of levels. There were really senior people working at all different levels. There were people at more individual contributor jobs or entrepreneurs working all different levels of hours. And it's just not true that everyone is putting in these big hours. Myth number two, this overwork is going to pay off. I'm going to put my time in and it's going to really help me get where I need to go. But the reality is that we're all human. When I first started working on this book, I was at a writer's conference and I asked the question, and I wasn't even sure that this was going to be a book. And a woman walked up to me and handed me this note, which I still carry in my wallet today. I'll read part of it. There's no English word, but there's a Japanese word called karoshi, which means death by job. I just buried my 52-year-old husband due to karoshi. He was a brilliant genius. And I went and I talked to her, and she just explained he just could not stop working. And I know for sure that if I had stayed on the path I was on, I would have had a major health issue. One of my friends and coworkers who was working similar hours to me, just a couple of years after I cut back my hours, he had a stroke at the age of 48. This is serious stuff. If we don't put our own health first, we are literally risking everything. Okay, myth number three, less sleep is okay. Well, the reality is that we know from science that sleep-deprived brains are different. So I'm sure no one here on the call knows how to read these brain scans, and I certainly don't either. But this is a CT scan or an MRI or something of a sleep-deprived person on the right and a regular non-sleep-deprived person on the left. And so you see these two little bright dots here. I think even I can see those. That is the amygdala. The amygdala is our emotional center. It's where our primitive, our fears, our anger comes from. And what it shows is the amygdala is more reactive to negative images. So basically what this means is, and this shouldn't surprise you, is when we're sleep deprived, we are biologically more emotional. The Army did a study because they're really interested in how people function when they're asleep, being sleep deprived is the equivalent of having a blood alcohol content of 0.1. And there have been lots of studies showing people with impaired cognitive function from being sleep deprived, and the people don't even notice it. They don't even realize that they're not doing as well as they were when they were getting a normal amount of sleep. And the final piece of biology is they've discovered that when we're asleep, there actually fluid goes into the brain and it clears out toxic substances. It's the same way that lymph works to clear out toxic substances in our muscles. And so when we don't sleep, we have this gook, which is gumming up the works in there. So again, we might think we're doing okay and we're getting by with the energy drinks and the coffee and whatever, but we are biologically not functioning as well. Okay, and this is the study I just showed you. You can see these. I'll share these slides with Bella, and she'll share them with you, so you can see this if you want to. Now, myth number 4 is I just have too much work to do. I have so many things on my plate. I just have no choice. I have too much to do. I can't possibly afford to do less. Well, the reality is that when we are working too many hours, we are losing efficiency. So this is looking over the course of 4 weeks. This is how efficient people are. And so if you're working 45 to 50 hours, we stay pretty efficient. When you get up to 55 or 60, our efficiency goes down. And if you're more than 70, the efficiency just craters. It's less than 65%. So you might wonder, what were they measuring? They were measuring pouring concrete. We can't even pour concrete correctly if we're working too many hours. Okay, studies have shown that for knowledge workers, it's even worse. We lose our creativity, we lose our ability to make decisions. And certainly, I was working 90 hours. I went from 90 to 60. Nobody even noticed. Those are just 30 wasted hours. Now, I want to pull in another expert, somebody that you've probably heard of is Henry Ford. Now, Henry Ford was a capitalist. He was pretty ruthless. He's not exactly a softie, okay? So he implemented the 40-hour work week at his car factories, and he was criticized by everybody. They were like, why are you doing this? Well, he explained it. And what he said was, we know that from changing from 6 to 5 days that we can get as great production in 5 days as we can in 6. We'll probably get greater because the pressure will bring better methods. What he said was, the harder we crowd the business for time, the more efficient it becomes. So think about that. Here's a guy who wants to make money, but he can make as many cars in 5 days as he could in 6, just because people made fewer mistakes. One of the things that I used to do is, when I was working the long hours, I would send off some email at 10 o'clock at night. Well, more often than not, I would get something wrong, or I would make somebody mad, I'd piss them off, and I have to spend an hour the next day kind of digging out and cleaning up the pieces. Just by stopping work at 9 o'clock, I avoided all of those mistake emails at 10 o'clock, which cost me time. Myth number 5 is that the more senior you are, you have to do more work. Well, the reality is that we become more effective when we work less. And here's an interview from Mana Lanescu. She's the president of Lightspan Digital. She has 36,000 Twitter followers. They do a lot of great digital marketing stuff. And she shared her story to CNN a few years ago. She was sleep deprived, thought she could just power through and get all her work done until she got in a car accident. And since then, she started practicing good sleep hygiene. And what she said was she was able to work more and make better decisions, and business was easier to close just by limiting, just by making sure she got a good night's sleep. Okay, so when I put everything together, I wrote my book, and the root cause of this chronic overwork is misguided priorities, where we prioritize the company over the people. And we start doing what's best for the company instead of what is best. And so I dug in and I analyzed, and I found there were really three things that contributed to this lifestyle of overwork. They had to do with either people, circumstances, or the corporate culture. And so I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes on each one. Okay, so the first category is there's a lot of personal reasons for overwork. And these can be things like wanting to make money or determination to get ahead. You know, sometimes people are afraid. They're afraid if I don't work this much, I'm going to lose my job. Sometimes, in a couple of, very heartfelt conversations I had, people realized that they were putting in all these hours at work because things weren't so good at home, and that they were using work as a refuge from a bad marriage or a bad family situation. And sometimes, like me, I was a believer in the company mission. I wasn't just drinking the Kool-Aid, I was serving the Kool-Aid. I was determined we were going to change the face of medicine and change the face of research. And all of those things are lofty and wonderful goals, but I was not serving them correctly by putting so much of my time into the work. Another person-related question is, there's a lot of discussion in the workplace about being a team and working towards the same goals, but the reality is that not everybody is trustworthy. And I heard a lot of stories, and I share them in the book. And as I thought about them, I came up with ways to categorize people. You could think of someone as a scorpion, a fox, or a wolf. And because I want to kind of get to the specific recommendations, I don't have time to go into great detail right now. But for each one, I use like an Aesop's fable or a parable to kind of illustrate what these people are like. And for the fox, there's a parable about the fox and the crow, where the crow is sitting up in the tree and it's got a nice piece of cheese, and the fox says, "Oh, Madam Crow, you have such a wonderful voice. I'd love to hear you sing." And so when the crow opens its mouth to sing, it drops the cheese, and the fox grabs the cheese and runs away. So there's just certain people that they can convince you that black is white and everything sounds wonderful. But when it comes time to actually get any work done, they actually have no idea how things get done. One person shared a story with me. He said he was at an offsite and they were talking about how to treat other people. And he said, "Well, I just follow the golden rule. I try to treat other people as how I'd like to be treated." And he was amazed that somebody said to him, "Hey, look, I don't care how I'm treated. I just want to get ahead." And he couldn't believe that other people had this kind of opinion. And so, that person was probably a fox. They just like to talk. They just wanted to get ahead. And you don't want to trust that kind of person. And if you understand sort of, okay, the fox, is the talker, and the scorpion is really focused on the goal and will steamroller anybody to get their goal. And the wolf might bark a lot, but is also a pack animal, and it likes to, and it really will sort of think about the welfare of the pack. So understanding, who you're dealing with helps you understand whether you can trust them and under what circumstances you can trust them. Let me just pause here a second. Does this make sense? Do these sound like the kind of people that you've had to deal with from time to time at work? Let's hear from you in the chat panel. I want to make sure you're still with me here. Totally. Yep. Okay, good. All right. Yes. Okay. Well, now sometimes it's our circumstances that lead to overwork. And obviously, if you were a first responder and you were in Houston, you had to be working all the time. That was a life or death situation. But our amygdala and our subconscious doesn't know the difference between what's a real life and death situation and what's just seems like life and death in the workplace. In the book, I share the story about someone who I call Pat, and they had a problem with the product, and he was the head of product development. So he just took it on himself. He said, "I'm going to fix this." He stayed up all night, for a few days in a row, and the next thing you knew, he was in the hospital with dehydration and an anxiety attack, and missed about a week of work to recover. And the circumstances are going to happen, and we can't control them, but we can control how we respond to them. And just because we're really busy doesn't mean we're actually having an impact. Doesn't mean we're doing things which are moving the bar. And there's a study, it's called there's something called the illusion of control, where people think that if they throw the dice really soft, they have a better chance of getting a 7 than if they throw them really hard. And the game of craps, getting a 7 is a really good thing. And so it's an illusion that it's one of these cognitive illusions that we're all susceptible to. And we think that just because I'm scurrying around, I think I'm actually helping, but that's not always the case. And so the third thing which can come into play is the corporate culture. What are the stories that everyone tells? It's like, yeah, there's a handbook, and yeah, in theory, I get this amount of vacation, but is it actually safe to take your vacation? And, are we or is it this we expect you to do what it takes to get it done? And so these unwritten rules of the company, they also have an impact on how much people are working. And in the book, I give specific strategies to help counter each of these different sorts of drivers. But what it really comes down to, and that's why you're here, is to kind of hear the real deal. It's like, okay, well, what can I do differently? And the focus we want to get to is setting priorities. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the secret for me was putting people first and the company second. You can only have one top priority. There can only be one. I'm a big Highlander fan, love that movie. But it's true, there can only be one. There can only be one top priority. So Richard Branson, CEO of the Virgin Group, ultra billionaire, built multiple successful businesses. His advice is you need a book time to spend with your family. And I would say the same thing. You need to put that time on your calendar. You need to block it off to make sure that you're spending that time. And when you're going to be away, make sure you have a backup so that there's no excuse. Now, this is going to depend exactly on how you do this. Will depend on your company culture. But the idea is, however you execute it, is to make the family as a priority. Second thing I want to ask you is, what do you say yes to? Because every time you say yes at work is a no to somebody else. We all get 168 hours every week, and how we choose those is really the difference. And how we divide that time up has an impact. Okay, so I want to share a tool for you. So it's a trick that I've used with a number of my coaching clients, and I've used it myself and still do. And the idea is that you can only have, what you want to do is you want to write down all of your priorities, everything you're working on, and put them in order. And then draw a line under the third. Take your list into your manager and say, this is everything I'm working on. These are my top 3 priorities. Do you agree? You could talk it through. Maybe you shuffle things around. Okay, yep, we're agreed on the top 3. Then get out a priority matrix and use this Idolbuster top 3 template. And so here in the upper left, we're going to put our top 3 priorities. And these are always yes. You want to spend most of your time doing these things. And if something comes up that has to do with the top 3 priority, answer is yes. Now, if someone asks you to take a meeting or to do some work on something which is on priorities 4 through 6, the answer is yes, I'll take a meeting, but it's going to be next week. If today's Wednesday or today's Thursday and someone says, hey, Greg, can you come to a meeting on Friday about X? Sorry, I can't come, but schedule me for next week. Now, priorities 7, 8, 9, you can say yes, but only for a 5-minute conversation. Here, these are really, you have 6 things more important than these. And so here, what you want to be doing is redirecting people. oh, I can't help you with that, but if you call Bill over in accounting, he's going to have you answer. Oh, if you call Jane in tech support, she should be able to help you with this particular problem. And finally, in the last quadrant, I call it never yes. Things here, you just don't want to ever say yes to these. Now, it's really up to you to set these boundaries. But one thing I would say is don't ever say yes to somebody else's work. It's like, oh, well, it's really their job, but I think I can do a better job. So yeah, I'll create the slides. If it's their job and they mess it up, that's their issue to deal with. And that's their manager's issue to deal with. And if you're their manager, you need to train them up to be able to do their own work. Now, for me, I recommend several other boundaries as well, like never take phone calls after 7 at night. You should have a no phone call zone, okay? For me, the first step I took in cutting back my life was that I said, okay, I'm going to stop working at 9:30. And then I'm going to stop working at 9 because I need some time to unwind so I can get a good night's sleep. So pick a time. After that, the computer's closed, the phone's off, and you just give yourself some time to unwind. And then the last thing is anything that's priority 10 or later, you just got too many other more important things to do. Just don't take any time to work on this. And so here's a trick that you can use. So let's say you say no to this meeting tomorrow. It's priority number 6. And they call you up and say, but Greg, we really need you there. This is really important. And I'd say, oh, I'm so sorry. I realize it's important, but I talked with my manager and there are more important things that I need to do that's a higher priority for me right now. I can come to the meeting next week. Why don't you schedule it for Monday or Tuesday? Or I can talk to you for 5 minutes right now and see if I can give you an answer. If you take that kind of approach, people will respond. And you're not the bad guy, and you can be sympathetic to them, but it's really just an issue of I have something else which is a higher priority. Has anyone ever tried this? I'm curious. What do people think? Have they ever tried this kind of approach, and how do you think it might work in your situation? Let's hear from you in the chat. So nope, never tried that. Yeah, this is something different. This is something I've used this with a number of, I'm a total yes on my work. Frown, yeah. It's a habit. We're going to get to that in a little bit. These are habits that we have. So it's when we're really devoted to our work, it becomes a habit. And I know for me, it was really an emotional attachment. So it's not about saying no to the work. It's about saying yes to something outside of work. Good approach. I like the yes for 5 minutes. Thanks, Carol. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so here's the question. So how do you say no to your boss? Okay, so given what we've talked about, you've created your matrix. How is it that, let's say my boss comes up to me and says, Greg, hey, can you do these slides, or can you come to this meeting tomorrow? I want you to help me prepare for this. So how do we say no to the boss? Well, we can go back to our matrix once again, and we don't say no. We say yes. Good approach. I like the 5 minute. Good point about emotional attachment. Okay, sorry, I'm interrupting myself reading your comments. They're very intriguing. But so here we are. We have our boss. Hey, can you do this? Can you come to this meeting? Can you prepare the slide deck? It's not in my top 3. So my answer is, if my boss says, Jane, yes, Jane, I can absolutely prepare that slide deck. I will be there at that meeting. I will just send an email to these other people and let them know that I'm going to be late on this deliverable, which had been priority number 2, and I'll just let them know that I've been given something else that's more important to do, and so I won't be able to deliver that when I initially promised it, but I'll get it to them a few days later. And there we go. As the thing, we don't say no, you say yes and. Yes, I can do that, and the implication is I won't be able to do this other thing. You will be amazed at what happens. Oh, well, yeah, that other thing really is more important. So how about we have this meeting instead of Thursday? How about we have it Friday or next Monday? Will that work for you? Yeah, absolutely. Oh, you're going to not be able to deliver that other thing? Well, instead of doing the whole slide deck, what I really need from you is 2 bullet points. Oh, yeah, I can give you 2 bullet points. That's not a problem. If we're talking about a language of priorities with our manager, then, and some of them might push back on this, because there's a temptation, everything's a top priority. And that's where we need to work on our upward management skills. Well, hey, I can serve the company best if we kind of stick to these priorities that we agreed upon. So here's the question. How do we go about making a lasting change? Okay. Well, in order to make a change, it has to do with this, sort of understanding our habits and understanding these emotional attachments, okay? So I want to bring your attention to the work by Jonathan Haidt. He's a cognitive scientist, and he came up with this model for behavior of the elephant and the rider. And the elephant is kind of our emotional mind. It's our subconscious. It's all the amygdala type stuff. It's being impulsive. And then the rider is the rational mind. And the rider might say, I want to go in a certain direction. But if the elephant doesn't want to go, it's going to take all of our willpower to try to push the elephant in that direction. And the second that our willpower slips, the elephant's going to move back. So how can if we really want to make a lasting change, you need to train the elephant. You need to put down a little trail of peanuts so the elephant makes a little change, and then it makes another little change, and then it makes another little change. And suddenly over time, we've changed our habits. And that's exactly, I didn't know about this when I decided to cut my hours back, but that's exactly how I went about it. I made small, gradual changes. My family's more important, so instead of stopping work at 9, I'm going to stop work at 8. And I want to spend even more time with the family, so I'm going to stop working at 7. And gradually over time, my life came back into balance. Now, when Bella introduced me, she said that I practice something called Mussar. And it's a Jewish mindfulness practice. It has roots that go back 1,000 years. And it's really has a lot of similarities to cognitive psychology. The idea is that we have an inner world where we have our values and beliefs. And based on our values and beliefs, we set our priorities. Well, based on our priorities, we make decisions. And then after decisions, we take actions. And we know from things like cognitive dissonance is as soon as we start taking actions, it actually reinforces our values and beliefs. So if we change our priorities and we say, okay, I'm going to start putting people first, then we'll start making different decisions. And as we make decisions and take actions, that will again reinforce our beliefs and our values, and it becomes a real virtuous cycle. And so Mussar is a systematic practice which takes advantage of this and helps us bring about change. So in Mussar, what we do is we focus on certain character traits. There's a lot of different character traits. There's things like humility and patience and enthusiasm. And the one I want to share with you today is called order. Okay, so when we're in a Mussar practice, we'll start the day with like a little mantra that we'll read or focus on for a couple of minutes. And so the one for order is first things first and last things later. And so we'll say that at the beginning of the day, and that kind of frames our day. And then as we go about our day, where it's called, in psychology, it's called priming. And so we're primed to notice how order shows up. Okay, so as we're observing how order impacts our lives, the second thing we look for is, where do we fit on the spectrum? Yeah, in one way that Mussar is different than other things is having too much of a character trait is just as bad as having too little. So in the case of order, too little can lead to kind of chaos and disorganization and poor planning. But too much order can become obsessive. It can become constraining. And it can lead to inflexibility. So the issue is not we want to get as much order as possible. The issue is we need to come into balance. Another example, or another way to think about this, is patience is another one of these character traits. And if we have too little patience, we can be angry or frustrated. Too much, we can be staying in a bad job or not taking action. But anyway, I'm diverting myself here. So the one that's most important for us right now, as we're thinking about these kind of making decisions about our life, has to do with this spectrum of order. And so there's another way that we can use the matrix to help us. So we can create two quadrants that have to do with too little order or too much order. So you can think about like your life, and I've done this exercise, and I said, okay, well, how does too little order show up in my life? Well, I tend to be on this side kind of more often than not, but I tend to be messy. I'll leave my dishes on the table. I won't plan ahead as much as I should, and I'll just kind of wing it. But there are other times when there's too much order in my life, where I'm going to rehearse conversations in my head, or especially when I'm feeling stressed, I'll get very rigid and inflexible about schedule changes, and I'll try, I'll sometimes dig my heels in. Okay, so just writing these down, these tell me, okay, well, what are areas where I can, choose to improve? Whoops. Okay, I've gone back. So then another part of Mussar is to kind of keep track of the changes. And so that's where the bottom two come into play. And that's where we can look for the small wins. Like, for example, okay, I'm going to start putting my pajamas under my pillow, because I realized that at night I would get stressed out looking for my pajamas. So if I just put them under my pillow, that's going to remove a source of stress. So some small wins today is I put my PJs under the pillow, I looked at Priority Matrix, and I proactively canceled the phone meeting tomorrow. It wasn't in my top 3. I really didn't want to have to try to do some subpar work at night, so I canceled that meeting to open up some time, and I moved it to next week. And then we know we don't always get it perfectly, so sometimes there are opportunities for improvement. So here, I realized, I left my breakfast dishes at the table. I didn't bring them into the kitchen. And I kind of worked on my slides at the last minute for this big presentation that I was doing. So these are areas where, okay, it's a reminder I have some work to do, but I want to be, we can be loving and gentle with ourselves about that, and we just can kind of observe it and move on. So in summary, what we talked about today is that, working longer hours is something that hurts productivity. And there's a lot of myths about why we have to work better. But the reality is that we start cranking out subpar work, and we just chew up time. And that by working fewer hours, we can actually produce higher quality work and be more impactful. Second thing we talked about is putting people first, and whether that can include ourselves and our own health. It can include our family. If we're not, if we're single or we don't have family, it might be friends. It might be joining clubs or activities or finding ways to connect. Next suggestion is to pick your top 3 each week. Every week, look at everything you're doing, pick your top 3, get your manager to buy off on it, and then allocate your time appropriately. And the matrix can be a really nice tool to help you do that. Suggestion number 4 is get more sleep. According to the CDC, a third of Americans are sleep deprived. It's one of the leading causes of death is tied to sleep deprivation. It causes us to work not as well. Very strong recommendation. It's one thing you can do right now to start bringing your life into balance is to get more sleep. And the last thing we talked about was how a practice like Mussar can help you change your habits and to balance order. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Bella, who can help us lead us in some Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Greg. This was so interesting. I am going to be opening up Q&A in 1 second, so you should see the Q&A box right there. Feel free to pop in questions that you would like to ask Greg, and we're going to go through as many as possible. But before that, I do want to just say thank you so much, Greg. This was so interesting. And to everyone listening, I just want to let you know that I'm going to be sending you the slides to this webinar, so that you can, look back, review if there are some, interesting things that Greg said in the templates. If you were, furiously taking notes, don't worry. I am going to be forwarding that to you. In addition, there are a couple more pages that I am going to be sending you about the 2 books of Greg's. Whether or not you're looking at, your habits at work and understanding that maybe you are sort of idolizing your corporation, or whether you are, intrigued by the Mussar practice, I'm going to send you information about those books. They've got some really interesting Amazon reviews that I saw that you can look at to see if maybe you want to, make that part of your reading list. And then, of course, you have a chance, of course, to receive a signed copy. But I also want to let you know, watch out for my email because I'm also going to give you some information on how you might be able to access Greg. In this age of do-it-yourself, I think we sometimes put pressure on ourselves to, change ourselves alone. But, sometimes working with a coach can be super helpful. And whether or not you're religious, whether or not you're Jewish, I definitely think that, thinking about whether Greg might be able to help you find some order, even for a temporary time, is definitely, a valuable thing to consider. So be sure to watch out for my email with all of those, resources that I promised. But now I am going to open up the Q&A box. So please let us know if you have any questions. You should be able to see a box in your controls where you can pop the questions in. So I'm just going to wait for a couple seconds. So I'm actually seeing one question. So I have a person who's asking about collaboration. So I know that, Greg, you use Priority Matrix on your own. But in terms of collaboration, do you have any practices? You mentioned shutting off your computer, not taking calls. Do you have any practices for emails? Do you think about emails in a particular way based on the Mussar methodology that you might be able to share?
Yeah, so I have a couple. I'm not sure I'm completely understanding the question, but I think it's like email comes in a couple of ways. I think a best practice, and I'll be the first one to say I don't always follow this, but when I'm most efficient, I'll set a time a day when I answer emails, and I'll try to bin and batch that together. Because emails can be a constant distraction, and especially if I need to do some writing or some deep thinking work, I will turn off my email because it can become a distraction. Also, I'm a big believer in not looking at emails. Like, I don't ever open my email on Saturdays. I have one day a week where I never look at email. And even if, and when I was in the corporate world still, I would not, and I was getting my life in balance, I stopped looking at email. I never looked at it after 9 at night, and sometimes not after 7 at night. Because the second, I'm out, I'm hanging out with my family, and I look at my phone and I read that email, and all of a sudden my head is right back in work again. And although I'm supposedly hanging out and relaxing, I'm really thinking about work. So I actually view, like, if you look at email on a weekend day, it's like an hour, it's like working for an hour mentally. So I'm a big believer in just not looking at email for certain chunks of time. Um, I hope that answered the question.
Awesome. Thank you. And then we have one other question. Our attendee is asking, could you give us some tips to manage when your boss doesn't accept the yes to do something but say no to another thing?
Well, that's where a lot of it comes down to when I was talking about the understanding whether your boss is a scorpion or a fox or a wolf. So it's really understanding what is most important to your boss. Like if your boss is a fox, what that means is they want to look good all the time. And so there's a way you can manage them to say, like, okay, I know, the reason why I want to put off this other thing is I'm not going to be able to do a quality job on it. And I think it might reflect better on the department if we took just a couple extra days to get this other task done. And I think it'll reflect well on all of us to do that way. Or if they're a scorpion where they just care about the mission, it's like, you know what, you and I both want to change the way that people go to the grocery store. And with our software, we're going to, make it much easier and effective for people to shop. But we can only achieve that goal if we're focused on just a couple of things at once. And I know that this is important. I can't do both of these equally well, so we need to know which one is the priority. And it might take a couple of rounds of going back and forth, but gradually you can change your manager to think in this way.
Thank you, Greg.
Is that helpful? Did that make sense?
And yeah, feel free to add in the comment box, any follow-up questions, and we're getting a yes, that does make sense. And that's really interesting, if you don't mind me jumping in, Greg.
Please
the
do.
Idea that you and I have spoken about, that Mussar can help interpersonally, right? It gives you a greater understanding of the person and how you need to relate. So it's, of course it is spiritual and ethical, but then there's a very practical aspect to that. So I find that really interesting. We also have another question. So I guess the question is, there's going to be anxiety in the process, right? It's not easy to tell yourself suddenly, I can actually work less than 90 hours a week. So do you have any thoughts on, working with that anxiety that you're going to have to sit with as you do sort of push yourself to let go and maybe only work 70 hours a week, etc.? Thoughts on that, Greg?
That is a great, great question. When you're working 90 hours a week, or even if you're working 80 or 70, it's like a car that's driving 100 miles an hour. And the last thing you want to do is slam on the brakes. The car is going to skid, you might get in an accident. And when I worked with coaching clients and people say, okay, yeah, I'm working 90 hours, I'm just going to leave the office at 5 every day and not do a thing. And that lasts about 2 days, because it just creates all kinds of anxiety. It creates disruptive in the workplace. It creates anxiety for yourself. So you want to make just one small step. If you're working 90 hours a week, your goal is to work 85 hours the next week. It's not to suddenly go to 40 hours. That's too big a change for the system. So, I always say the place to start is to set an end time for your work. I'm not going to do any work after 9 o'clock. Or for some people, I'm not going to work after 10. I had one guy I worked with, it was a college professor. He said, okay, I'm not going to do any work after 1 in the morning. He didn't show up till 11 in the office, so that was fine for him. But having that boundary, I always recommend stop working 2 hours before you need to go to sleep, because you really want to give your system. I used to be addicted to Ambien. It's horrible. I was taking, I had to take sleeping pills to get to sleep. And even after I stopped working all the time, it took me years to kick the Ambien habit. So I know exactly how hard it is. And it was because I was so keyed up, I needed drugs to fall asleep. But when I started giving myself a couple of hours to unwind, um, my sleep got much better.
Awesome. And then we have another question. How does one maintain their authentic self when practicing the great advice practiced here? The work culture tends to ostracize you, and or there are performance corrections because you have healthy boundaries. Interesting question.
Yeah, I so relate to that. My performance reviews, I would get, this is a true story. I got this performance review, and it was with the new manager, and she said, "Greg, you get more work done than anyone I have ever met. It's astounding how effective you are." And then she went on to say, "But your advancement might be in trouble because you're perceived as a 9 to 5er." Which was absolutely ridiculous. I wasn't a 9 to 5er, and B, even if I was, who cares? Because I was getting more done than anyone she'd ever met. So I totally know like what you're talking about. And so one thing that I realized, and this is where I didn't practice Mussar at the time, that it could have really helped me, is I was very arrogant. Um, in those same performance reviews, they'd be like, "Wow, you get all this done, but people don't like to work with you because you're arrogant." So I made a really big point of saying, "Hey, everybody, I'm leaving to coach my kids' soccer, and you're not going to be able to get a hold of me." And, rubbing people's nose in it didn't help. Now, I hope you don't have that particular issue, but we can be clever about how we do this. And I realized that I should have just started leaving at 3 one day a week. Nobody would have noticed. They just blocked my calendar. Um, you know, Leaving to go to a yoga class at lunch. I'm going to a doctor's appointment. It's really nobody's business. If you're going to a doctor's appointment, nobody's gonna mess with you. So sometimes we have to kind of say, maybe say the right things, but we're very quietly setting our boundaries. Like when I stopped answering email at 9, nobody noticed, nobody cared. And if there's like, okay, we have a big event tomorrow, yeah, I'm gonna, maybe one day a month, I'll look at my email a little bit later at night when I know that somebody important's going to be looking. But for most of the time, we just need to be a little clever and political about how we go about it. And that's where kind of I get into some of those strategies in the kind of corporate culture part of the book.
And then we have a question about tips to avoid like a huge extra job before and after the vacation. You mentioned making time for vacation and preparing for that. So it looks like we have a question about a little bit more detail on that.
Yeah, so here's my tip number one. When you come back so when you leave for vacation, write in your out of office message, "I'm going on vacation. I will not be checking my email. Please email me again after I get back." And then don't read a single email from when you were gone. I knew people who would spend an entire day reading the 500 emails that came in or 1,000 emails that came in, and maybe one or two would be important. You know what? Most of those things in the email, they're just going to take care of themselves. And if it's really important, someone will get back to you. So that's one thing. Another in terms of planning is, find someone to cover for you. It's a very healthy practice to have some cross training of people and people at different levels, even more senior people. Train up a lieutenant who can be part of the succession plan, who could potentially take over for you someday, and let them delegate a little bit to them and let them run with it. They'll be really happy. And there's always more work to do than any of us can do. So it's really about, a lot of it has to do with also just being confident and having courage that things will turn out okay. And in terms of going to the doctor, that's just saying, you know what, my health is more important than anything. If I get sick, I'll have less time to work. I'll do poorer quality work. I'm not doing the company any favors. I'm not doing myself any favors if I don't go to the doctor. I mean, as people have probably heard of Steve Jobs, head of Apple Computer, modern day Leonardo da Vinci, total genius. He died of a curable form of pancreatic cancer because he wouldn't go to the doctor. He had a curable form of pancreatic cancer, and he didn't go to the doctor for a year and get treated, and so he died. I mean, come on. It's our health is everything. We need to put that first.
All right, and it looks like we don't have any more questions. Thank you so much, Greg, and everyone, thank you so much for your time. Look out for my email with the promised resources. And wow, a lot of these questions were very, very powerful, and so thank you for asking those questions, and Greg, thank you for your thoughtful answers. All right, unless you have any more last minute questions, I'm going to say, thank you everyone, and have a great rest of your day.